So I know we talked about the heart already, but I just wanted to kind of go over a few things that I either didn't get completely explained in class, or I felt that there was a little bit of confusion. And definitely when I was seeing some of you do your dissections, I know you want your pretty hearts to look like these animations. Unfortunately, they don't. So a lot of you with your dissection, you might have thought, oh my gosh, I don't know which one is the superior vena cava, and I can't find this, and I can't. Don't get too worried about that. That's not the biggest ordeal. Unless you're going to become a heart surgeon in the near future, I think you have plenty of time to learn. But you all did great with dissections. You really were able to open up, look at that chordae tendineae that we talked about. You were able to see the valves, see the different arteries and veins, and for the purposes that it was for, you did just fine. All right, again, quickly wanted to briefly describe what I meant by that parallel arrangement. I think some of us got confused just slightly there. And again, parallel arrangement allows for each tissue to receive the same quality of blood, which is nice because we don't want half of, part of our digestive system to get a certain oxygenation level of blood, while the kidneys get maybe 100% oxygenation, and then the lower limbs only get 30% oxygenation. So that's why parallel arrangement is good. Allows for each tissue to receive the same quality of blood. Number 2, it allows for independent regulation of flow to each area. That should kind of make some sense because again, they're in parallel beds. And 3, we then have less pressure required to drive blood flow. So just wanted to cover that real fast. Nothing too grim about that. Then we talked about, again, remember that SA node and impulse conduction. Our SA node is our pacemaker. If you lose the ability for your SA node to function, you need an external pacemaker put in. Something that is not your own. It will shock your heart every little second it needs to. It can read the impulse conduction. You don't want that happening, so please take care of your heart. And we talked then about these different segments. Remember, your atria are going to contract first. Your ventricles contract from the apex towards and up through the base. Again, that can be then seen once we get into those Purkinje fibers. And at rest, only about 50% to 60% of blood in the ventricles is pumped out. When you exercise, hopefully it's more like 80 to 90%. All right. Also, going through some other little parts that I wanted to rehash, we were looking at our EKG. Your P wave, again, is that atria depolarizing. Your PR interval, I said, was due to the AV node delay, but this is also a delay in order to allow our ventricles to fill with blood. So please make sure you do understand that. That QRS, we talked about ventricle depolarization. The ST segment. So I misspoke just in class, so clarifying this for you again. Your ST segment is where our systole begins. So contraction, physical contraction, and this would be contraction of the ventricles, just so you're aware of that. Your T wave then is repolarization of the ventricles, and again, remember, we don't see atrial repolarization because it is covered up by that QRS segment. All right, flipping through some of these other ones. Preload and afterload. Please be aware of these. You will be answering questions about this. Again, preload is equivalent to end diastolic volume. It's the force that stretches the muscle, right? So it's the ability for our ventricles to stretch. If you have much, stretchier ventricles, or specifically that left ventricle, obviously you're going to be able to get more blood in there. If you have more of a stenotic or a hardening of your left ventricle, you're not going to get much blood in there. And therefore your ejection fraction, the amount of blood you're able to pump out, is going to be ridiculously low. All right. Afterload, this is the amount of force needed to overcome aortic pressure. All right. So if you're having a really high heart rate or really high blood pressure, then your heart, your ventricles have to overcome a much higher pressure. And so what that means is the higher your afterload is, or this pressure at which the aortic valve opens, this also then means the earlier it will close, and therefore you won't get as much blood pumped out, and you'll actually have probably a decrease in stroke volume. So that's what I was looking with and talking to you about when we were looking at altering afterload and altering preload. So please do go back and look over those things. Just a few words looking back at this. Remember, diastole is relaxation, systole is contraction, and stroke volume down here in the bottom is how much blood is expelled with by the left ventricle during a single heartbeat. So I'll repeat that one more time. Stroke volume is the volume of blood expelled from the left ventricle during a single heartbeat. So again, this is just one heartbeat. All right, do look back over those things. I think they're important. If you want to watch the little film that is embedded in this PowerPoint, please take a look at it. Overall, what the Frank-Starling law is saying, however, is, let me see here, there it is, as end diastolic volume increases, stroke volume increases. That's all the Frank-Starling mechanism and law is telling us. As we increase that preload, right? Let me find that slide for you all. As we increase the total amount of fluid, specifically blood, that we can fill into that left ventricle, that just by natural causes is going to increase our stroke volume no matter what. So take a look at it. I think it's only like 3-4 minutes long. It's not overly lengthy and it's not overly complicated. So do look at that. Lastly, please make sure you do know how to do this. If you were able to, and remember to keep that piece of paper that I handed back to you, you should have some examples on there for this. So using the example right here in this cool little example, let me see here if I can get a cool little red thing out. We have our QO2 is 200 and, sorry, this is all new technology for me, 50, right, milliliters, and we're going to divide that by, I misspoke here just a little bit. This is our pulmonary vein. So that's actually 0.2, and we're going to subtract then 0.15 from that. Wow, you can't see that at all, which actually then gives us a CO2 value of 5,000. Whoop. Wow, this is awful, guys. I hope you enjoy this when you're watching this. 5,000 milliliters, or 5 liters. And that is our cardiac output. So this is how you would do those problems. Pulmonary vein minus pulmonary artery divided by your QO2. I will give you QO2. So don't panic. I would give you all of these numbers. You just need to plug and chug. It's basic math problems all over again. All right. Hopefully that helps out a little bit of what we were talking about with the heart. I just wanted to cover a few of those things back over. All right. Moving on to blood. What is blood, right? Blood is made up of several different components. It is a connective tissue. I know we talked about that in 168. It is a special kind of connective tissue. Blood is made up of plasma and formed elements. So plasma, again, we have proteins, we have other solutes, we have water that makes up plasma. And then in our formed elements, we have platelets, white blood cells, red blood cells. All right. So the bulk of our blood is actually plasma. All right. The formed elements are only about 45 to maybe 46, give or take, percent. But again, most of those formed elements, as you can see here, are from red blood cells, whereas plasma is practically water, right? So just be aware of that. Don't get overly complicated with exactly what is blood unless you're a phlebotomist. I mean, that's not going to kill you one way or the other. Structure of a red blood cell, since we did our blood lab typing, or blood typing lab, misspoke. Today, this is our red blood cell. Remember, it is a disc shape. It is concave because of this little dimple inside. When we look at diseases such as sickle cell disease, when they're actually sickle shape and they're not these beautiful circles, this is where it can get very challenging to move blood because they can start to stick together and get stuck in vessels, which if you watch the next lecture, lecture 3, I guess you'll be able to hear about how that can change pressure and resistance. But also with sickle cell, you can't carry as much oxygen. And the whole point of our red blood cells is they have this cool protein. It is a quaternary structure protein, that is called hemoglobin. And with hemoglobin, what we are able to do is we can bind up to 4 oxygen molecules on each red blood cell. And why is this so important? Well, because we need blood in order to carry oxygen, because we need oxygen to nutrient, or wow, that was bad word, but to feed our tissues, give nutrients to our tissues. There was what I was looking for. All right. And it's made up of just 4 big globular proteins, and then all together makes this quaternary structure. If you think back to our amino acid structures, we got primary, secondary, tertiary, and then quaternary. And what this then means is somebody with sickle cell or any kind of anemia cannot carry the 4 oxygen molecules. They can only carry maybe like 1 or 2. And so, when they go to high altitudes, which we will cover next week in respiratory, and we'll look at why high altitudes can cause a lot of high altitude sickness, dizziness, fainting, nausea, because the oxygen percentage and the oxygen level isn't as high. So I think the most famous example is one of those NFL football players. He then was playing for the Pittsburgh Steelers, and they had a game up in Mile High City out in Denver, Colorado. And when he got out there, he almost like collapsed on a field, and they realized that he actually has the sickle cell trait. So he doesn't have full-blown sickle cell, but he carries the trait at which then he cannot carry the appropriate amount of oxygen to his tissues, and therefore he gets winded and wiped out much easier at these higher altitudes and higher elevations. Pretty cool stuff. So just look over that. Nothing big. You should have already heard about hemoglobin in some of your other studies. The big parts that I want to cover just quickly here, wrapping up, is the recycling of red blood cells. So we know that it's not like you get infused with red blood cells daily. I mean, we don't sit here with a bag and get infused with them. We're not vampires. We don't go around trying to bite each other's necks in order to get red blood cells to replenish. That would be creepy. Man, I've brought up vampires twice today. That's kind of weird. Anyhow, back on schedule. You have to recycle your old red blood cells. It keeps homeostasis, and it allows us then to replenish those stores. All right. So this happens via the breakdown of our hemoglobin molecule, our hemoglobin protein. It is broken down into heme, and that heme then is broken down further into its iron. Right? If we go back here, we can see this iron smack dab in the middle of this heme molecule. All right. The iron is transported through the bloodstream and allows for red blood cell formation back in the red bone marrow. Remember, yellow bone marrow is for lipids, and that's our storage of lipids, whereas red bone marrow, found primarily in our long bones, specifically big site of which is in your femur. So if you're ever going to give bone marrow transplants, they'll take it right out of your femur. This is more of a picture of a humerus right now that we're looking at, but no worries. But that iron metal is transferred over into your bone, where it then is absorbed and synthesizes new hemoglobin molecules. And those then can become part of red blood cells, because red blood cell production happens in our red bone marrow. Those red blood cells all the way down. They end up then getting broken down by macrophages. So macrophages are our destroyers of red blood cells after they have lived a nice healthy life of about 120 days. And then they break down into the heme and the iron, and that flows all through. But we also have to get rid of heme. Heme is very toxic to our body. In order to do that, heme is then broken down into biliverdin or biliverdin, however you want to pronounce it. It's a big fancy name. Biliverdin or biliverdin is broken down into bilirubin. Many of you should probably know bilirubin by now if you've ever been in a NICU or in peds or any of the sorts of little crazy baby times. Bilirubin binds to albumin. Without albumin, bilirubin does not go into the liver. All right. I want to make that a asterisky. You will likely probably see a question about that. If you have low albumin levels, and albumin is just a big fancy protein that carries things. It's a transporter protein. If you have low levels of albumin, you won't carry the bilirubin to the liver, and therefore it cannot then get excreted out. And so then you get the buildup of bilirubin. And when we have a buildup of bilirubin, what condition are we suffering from? Give you 3 seconds. I hope you said jaundice. Yes, jaundice is popping up yet again. All right, jaundice. Also, we can get jaundice if our bile duct down here in the liver, coming out of the liver, or our hepatic duct, if those are clogged and that bilirubin gets stuck in your liver and you can't excrete it out, well then yes, you can also get jaundice in that way. So several different types and different ways to get jaundice and have that condition. So just look back over that. Again, bilirubin, though, is supposed to be transported to the liver via albumin. Once in the liver, it follows through that bile duct into the large intestine, where it can be eliminated in our feces, but it can also be enzymatically changed into what we call urobilinogen, or in this case, this slide shows urobilins. And urobilins or urobilinogen is absorbed back into the bloodstream, taken down to the kidneys, and with the help of the kidneys is excreted in your urine. All right. No, this is not urea. So don't confuse urobilinogen and urea. Please don't do that. Very wrong. But when we talk about the urinary system, we'll bring back urobilinogen again. And so you can kind of see the difference. So we have to get those heme molecules out. They are toxic. And again, we do this in a step-by-step formation and enzymatic breakdown in order to get them either out in the feces or via the urinary system. Hopefully that makes a little bit more sense. Look at that. Next slide should help you probably with your blood lab. And it's showing you the different antigens versus antibodies and how all of this can happen. And if you get an interaction via the antibody with its antigen, it causes hemolysis, and then that is what you all saw today in your lab, and we're able to see then agglutination. Wow, I just said that really funny. Agglutination. All right. Blood typing, clumping versus not clumping, again, helps you with your blood lab. I just wanted to stick it in there so you all were aware. RH factor in pregnancy, we mentioned this a little bit. Again, first pregnancy, if mom is RH negative, fetus is RH positive, she will start to create antibodies towards that RH factor. It does not kill the child initially. It's the second pregnancy, however, that's the very dangerous one, because if maternal blood touches and crosses with fetal blood, and we have those antibodies towards that RH factor, that can actually cause then hemolysis, like what we just saw in the previous slide, and potentially kill the child. So this is now stopped with the RhoGAM shot. I don't know when it was invented or when it came about, but it's pretty much saved a ton of lives. So yay to science. All right. No, don't worry about this slide. I don't like this slide. Last thing I wanted to cover with the blood was your phases of hemostasis. No, do not confuse this with homeostasis. Hemostasis is blood clotting. Homeostasis is the returning back to normal. So these are two separate words, just clarifying that for you. Your first phase of hemostasis is your vascular phase. So you might have like a cut or a nick to a vessel. That causes the platelet phase, which all of a sudden your platelets, which are part of your formed elements, become very sticky and start to stick to that wound that you just suffered at that vessel, right? And then you have your coagulation phase, which I will go into a little bit more depth here in 5 seconds. And then you have your clot retraction phase. All right. So here we are. I don't know if I can zoom in any better than this, but hopefully this might help just a little bit. In your coagulation phase, you have two separate pathways. You have the extrinsic pathway and the intrinsic pathway. Both of these are working simultaneously, so don't think one overpowers the other. All right. So you have tissue damage. If going through the extrinsic pathway, we release, or your tissues per se, release factor 3. Factor 3 combines with calcium to form not to form, but then factor 7 comes in. All of this to make factor 10. All right. So factor 3 is released, combines with calcium, and factor 7 makes factor 10. So an easy way to remember extrinsic, there's an X in it. That's a 10. So this is 3 plus 7 gives you 10. And it really does in math class. Go check out math. All right. Your intrinsic pathway, usually you have factor 12 is released by your tissues. Factor 12 gets together with factor 8 and factor 9 to then give you 10. I don't know a fun way to remember that, so if you have a way to do that, 12 plus 8 plus 9 does not give you 10, but in this case it does. But each of which come together to a common pathway, and that is with the final of factor 10. So factor 10 is what we keep trying to get to. Make sure you are aware of this. Factor 10, why we need factor 10? It activates our prothrombin activator. I'll repeat that. Factor 10 is our activator of our prothrombin activator. We need prothrombin activator in order to change prothrombin into thrombin. The reason we need thrombin is we have to get fibrinogen into fibrin. All right? And fibrin is our mesh net fibrous protein that actually then keeps these platelets together and sticky and continues to heal the wound at that vessel. All right. I know that was a jumbly mess. I hope that makes a little bit more sense. If you have more questions, again, email me, contact me. I'll be around. This quiz is due Wednesday night, 11:55. It covers your heart, what I just covered here with blood, and lecture 3 of vessels. All right. Hopefully you got it.